Yuki Tsunoda delivered a big result in his and Honda's home Grand Prix under big pressure from the expecting Japanese fanbase, finishing in the final points paying position and executing a really strong race. On the team side, Yuki made a point to thank all of his pit crew for their quick work as he jumped 2 cars during the pit stop, but even Yuki himself pulled off some fantastic and crucial moves through Sector 1, and it just underlined his strong start to 2024. And now, whilst finishing in P10 and scoring 1 point might not sound like a big result, it's important to remember that ever since last season, and especially in 2024, for anyone from the lower midfield to score any points, not only does it take a really strong weekend all the way from qualifying, but you also need a lot of luck and to be at the right place and at the right time. In F1 right now, we kind of have 3 separate tiers. Red Bull are out by themselves, especially when it comes to race pace. Then in the upper midfield we have Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin and Mercedes, who have a small gap to the cars behind. And then we kind of have everyone else, with RB, Haas, Sauber, Williams and Alpine. What this means is that in an era where reliability has been better than ever before, unless something happens to one of the drivers in the top 5 teams, it's almost impossible for the drivers in the lower midfield to score any points. In Bahrain, none of the drivers in the top 5 teams had any issues, and so no one was able to score points. In Jeddah, even though Sainz was out, it was actually Stroll crashing out that opened up the P10, and so Hülkenberg was able to score a point. In Australia, we had Verstappen, Hamilton and Russell all DNF, and so 3 places opened up for Yuki, Hulk and K-Mag. And then in Suzuka, it took Lance Stroll having a disastrous qualifying to open up a chance of finishing in P10, which Yuki managed to hold on to in the end. The point is that so far this season, outside of reliability issues and post-race penalties which affected the final finishing order, Suzuka was actually the very first race where a car from the lower midfield actually beat a top 5 car at the checkered flag. And even then, it's only because Stroll massively underperformed that even opened the window of opportunity. Even so, with Yuki in 11th, he sits as best of the rest in the Drivers' Championship, even ahead of a Ferrari driver. Granted, that driver is Ollie Behrman, but when you also take into account the end of last year, including sprints, Yuki has now scored points 6 times in the last 9 Grand Prix weekends, and he's continued to carry that strong momentum into 2024. And now, Yuki's teammates have been a big talking point over the past couple of years, and it feels as though, because there is always such a big narrative around those other drivers, Yuki has never really been given the full credit for consistently beating them. When it was Gasly and Yuki, the dynamic at the time was pretty clear, with Pierre being the race-winning, experienced team leader, and Yuki being the young Honda protege who was fast, but at times a little bit crash-prone and not as consistent. Or when Gasly left and was replaced with a 28-year-old Nick de Vries, despite the fact that Nick was a rookie, the expectation given his experience of winning multiple championships was that he was going to slip into Gasly's old role of being the number 1 driver. That expectation then quickly came crashing down to earth as Yuki outperformed Nick comprehensively to start the season, and after just 10 races into 2023, Nick was out. Now at the time, because all of the attention was on the De Vries and Ricciardo situation, barely anyone gave any credit to Yuki because, well, all he did was beat a rookie, so what's really impressive about that? Following on from that, when the whole Ricciardo-Lawson seat swapping situation was happening, Lawson was genuinely impressive up against Yuki and proved beyond any doubt that he deserved a chance in Formula 1. But once Ricciardo came back and was already confirmed for 24 and was being touted for a Red Bull drive, Yuki still managed to outscore him in the last 5 races, but again, Ricciardo was post-injury, he wasn't there from the start of the season, and so it felt like Yuki wasn't really being given the credit that he deserved. And now in 2024, with both of the drivers starting from zero, whilst the expectation was for Ricciardo to be back to his best, leading the team and making a case for the Red Bull drive in 25, after the early season team orders tension in Bahrain, Yuki has comfortably been the better RB driver, out-qualifying Ricciardo in every single race by an average of 3.5 tenths, and has also finished ahead of Ricciardo in all but one of the races. However, even now, despite the narrative and expectations coming into the season from Red Bull, it still feels as though Yuki isn't getting enough credit because now the narrative is, well, Ricciardo is washed, Ricciardo is past his best, so Yuki should be beating him. I think the biggest problem for Yuki, in my opinion, and actually my biggest worry for him looking into the future, is that regardless of his performances, the Red Bull system is just not for him. After Australia, where Yuki finished in P7, Christian Horner was asked a direct question specifically about Yuki potentially being a Red Bull option, and I think his response tells you everything you need to know. Yuki's a very quick driver, we know that, but I think we want to field the best pairing that we can in Red Bull racing, and sometimes you've got to look outside of the pool as well. You've had a very fast unemployed driver win today. The market is reasonably fluid with certain drivers. I mean, Carlos is the only driver that's beaten Red Bull, so he appears to be our nemesis. And now, the question that was asked to Horner had nothing to do with Carlos Sainz, but unprompted he decided to pivot away from Yuki and talk about a driver from a different team. Now, I am not saying that if the Red Bull seat became available, that they should pick Yuki over Sainz, or that Yuki is in any way a better driver than Sainz, because he's absolutely not. I mean, Sainz has had more podiums than Yuki has had points finishes. But for me, it's more so the vote of no confidence behind the answer that confirms what I already knew to be true, which is that whether it's down to ability, mentality, maturity, or something else, Horner and Marco just don't rate Yuki regardless of who he beats, and they're never going to realistically consider him for a Red Bull drive. This leaves me thinking only one thing, which is that regardless of how Yuki performs, he has got to find a way out of the Red Bull family because otherwise, he has got a sell-by date at that team. It's also widely known that one of the biggest reasons that Yuki has been kept on for season after season is because even though he did come in as a Red Bull junior, in reality, he is actually more of a Honda junior who have backed him since 2016 and who Red Bull took on due to their technical partnership with Honda. What this also means is that on top of his results, Honda also provides an estimated $10 million a year to Red Bull as an incentive to keep Yuki. And I think that this is just another reason why Red Bull, with Horner and Marco, just don't have that same loyalty towards Yuki as they do for their more traditional juniors like a Ricciardo or a Lawson. At best, I think 2025 will be Yuki's last season at RB, because once the Honda support leaves in 26, I just don't think that they'll want to keep him there, especially with the Red Bull conveyor belt of younger drivers. Marco has always said that for any driver to stay at Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, RB, whatever they're going to be called tomorrow, they have to be able to win races in a Red Bull. But if the team doesn't even really see Yuki as an option at Red Bull with the way that he's driving right now, then what is the point of keeping him there? I honestly think that if you asked me who is in front of Yuki right now for that second Red Bull seat, I would say Checo, Sainz, Alonso, Albon, and if he strings together a couple of strong results, I still think that they choose Ricciardo over Yuki. Even if Alonso is perhaps a little bit crazy out of all of those picks, that still makes Yuki only the fourth or fifth option that Red Bull would go to. And so I say again, if there is no future for him at Red Bull, then there is never going to be a long-term future for him at RB. I think for Yuki, he needs to look at what Carlos Sainz did in 2018 by going from Toro Rosso to Renault. At the time, Sainz was considered to be a strong midfield driver, not too dissimilar to how Yuki is now. And even though he was beaten by Hülkenberg at Renault, he was able to take control of his own future and leverage his still really strong performances to get into a team like McLaren, where in a way I have always said his actual Formula 1 career really started. Given what they've already hinted, I know Honda would love to have Yuki at Aston Martin, either for 2025 or 2026 when they're going to come in, as their own Honda driver. Keep in mind, Honda aren't idiots. They wouldn't be paying Red Bull $10 million a year if they didn't think that Yuki was actually a good driver. Honda massively respect loyalty, and that is why with his performances, with his interesting personality that's really increased his popularity, and the way he represents Japan and the Honda brand, which is extremely important for Honda to have that Japanese focal point. There is a reason that they have backed Yuki for as long as they have. Aston Martin would be a fantastic team for Yuki, either alongside Alonso or in the post-Alonso era with a driver like Sainz in the other car. I mean, a lineup of Carlos Sainz and Yuki Tsunoda, I actually think that could be really exciting. But the Stroll situation complicates things a lot at that team, and it really comes down to if they're even contemplating dropping Stroll. If Honda can't sweeten the deal, or if Aston Martin doesn't feel that Yuki would be enough of an upgrade on Lance, then I also think a team like Williams could be a great option. Yes, looking at this season and where the cars are right now, it might seem like a backward step, but I think for Yuki, Williams could be a great place to start building his roots at that team in the same way that Sainz did at McLaren. And I also think under James Vowles for 2026, with the infrastructure and budget cap changes that he's pushed for, they just seem like a team with a lot of long-term potential. The point is, unless Yuki really believes in his heart of hearts that RB or Red Bull is where he is going to be in the next 2 or 3 years, the longer he waits it out at RB, the less options I think he's going to have going forward. In Formula 1, sometimes results alone aren't always enough to get you into a better seat, even if you deserve it. And timing can be just as important as your form. I think this season, with all of the seats available for 25, is the best point for Yuki to be sounding out his options and leveraging the fact that right now, he is driving the best he has ever driven, and he's probably been the best driver in the midfield so far. This is where, as always, I am very interested to get your thoughts. Do you believe like me that in the long term, there is no future for Yuki in the Red Bull family? And if not, then what is the best and most realistic team that you think he could go to? Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.